That's as good as I'm gonna do it.
Are we
It's
rolling?
beautiful.
We're rolling.
All right, folks.
Welcome back.
Welcome back to another episode
of Jesus Lounge.
It's the trilogy now. We are up to par with the Lord of the Rings and greater. I would say we've got better production, better casting, better storyline than any Lord of the
Better
Rings
CGI,
trilogy.
totally.
Better CGI.
Yeah.
So we're back.
CGI is really good. Watch
And
this.
we're here.
We need to have the ship.
That's all CGI.
The ship
The
passing
ship.
through the ring. Yeah.
Long bottom leaf. Finest weed and half the farthing.
And
Something like that.
And so we're just going to jump right in.
Dude.
Tonight we are joined by two new guests, one permanent, one only here
One
for
is a
tonight.
permanent guest.
Our official, and this is not trademarked so we can steal it, our official Jamie, also known as Mark.
Hello.
Mark.
And he's here for good, man. He's a part of the Jesus Lounge crew
Well, till I die.
till he
Yeah,
dies.
man. It's in the contract.
It's in the contract. It's like being in Scientology.
And then we'll do
Yeah.
all this again in the
Yes.
kingdom.
Yes.
Exactly. I wonder how many podcasts they have up there right now.
Seriously. Ours will be the best, though. No
Yeah.
doubt
I'm
about it.
getting some ash on your MacBook, so
Oh, great.
I hope it wipes off already.
No, that's fine.
You're
I
christening it.
usually ash on everywhere but the ashtray. I will ash on my jeans. It will happen. It's happened.
Yeah, it will happen.
In both episodes we've done so far.
No
It'll just-
shame.
Yeah. Well,
And then also our
give us some
guest,
character.
our special guest for the night is the one and only Charles Brewer.
Yeah, man.
If you don't know Charles, as you can already tell, he does have a beautiful voice and a beautiful mustache.
Yes.
You're generous.
He's
man.
just here
You're
to party,
generous.
here to have a good time. We're glad
We
he's
don't
here.
tell lies on this show.
We don't.
Oh, man.
We're followers of Jesus.
Yes.
So, Mark, let's just get right into it, man. What's everybody smoking tonight?
What are we smoking, bro?
All right, so we'll start off with Chad. He is smoking a Tabernacle Havana seed. This one is Connecticut number 142. It is from Nicaragua. I can't say that word properly. That's okay. Let's see. The wrapper is a USA Connecticut Habano. Binder is a Mexico San Andreas.
Uh-oh.
Filler,
Great
Honduras, and Nicaragua. The rest of us are smoking.
game. You guys teamed up against me
We
or
did.
something.
This
This
was
was not
unplanned.
It
planned.
was so
We walked
unplanned.
into the humidor independently and
It's
each
true.
had this.
Charles actually already had bought his before we even bought ours, so
true,
we didn't know
yeah.
what he was smoking.
Yeah.
These are the Plasencia Alma Fiorete. What's interesting about this is this company, they're farmer owned. They grow, sell, and produce it all on their own. They've been in the game for 170 years, and they're the biggest tobacco farmers. They produce about 80% of tobacco. They've
the
never
world?
missed a crop.
Literally in the world.
Wow.
So
In the
you're,
world, yeah.
You're
I'm
probably,
probably smoking their,
their tobacco.
well, statistically, that's probably what I'm doing.
Yeah.
Wow, that's cool.
They're pretty cutting edge because they offer healthcare on site for all their employees.
Oh, wow.
So yeah,
Respect.
Very
it's
cool.
good stuff right here.
Yeah.
We're smoking. This is my first
And that's what you
time.
guys are doing.
Yeah, the
Literally
only
all.
difference is their wrappers
You're the San Andreas like him.
correct.
Okay. so
And
we got
ours
San
is
Andreas.
the Colorado wrapper. So
The
it's-
Colorado wrappers,
Ah.
yes.
that kind of is a little bit more body, so you get more of the wrapper than you do the tobacco on the inside. But
Pretty
either
much
way,
the same filler.
we're rocking it.
Yeah.
This is a big cigar. So
And worth commenting, we are all experiencing the V cut.
this is also first time.
Yeah.
Take a look at that, folks. The V cut.
This is my first time with the V-cut, and
Man,
it's
Lotus. I
I'll never go back.
You'll
didn't
never go
even
back.
know that was
Nope.
a reality, but it's
Mhm.
great.
It's magic.
It pulls it a lot. It's more contained, and it's like
That cap
Yeah.
that stops the wrapper from unwinding.
it does. Yes.
It
Yeah.
retains more of the cap, and yet you've got so much more surface area because of the depth.
Yes.
So it's not so hard of a draw.
Yeah.
I
And you're
like it.
probably not getting as much tobacco in your mouth as you draw because it's
You can always take a bite if you miss it.
okay.
All right, so Chad, here we go. What do you think? What do you think about the haters out there that say liquid death should not be drank by Christians?
Who's saying that?
The haters, man.
Oh, the haters?
The haters.
I haven't heard from these haters.
They're saying that you can't drink Liquid Death because it's satanic.
Is it really?
What is in Liquid Death? What
It's
exactly
literally
is in that?
water.
It is
It's water with an
Frankenmark.
attitude?
It's in Frankenmarkter, Austria, bottled for Liquid Death by different stuff.
So Maverick City got canceled because they sold Liquid Death at a concert. Seriously.
Well, I really don't know anything about that. The reason why I get it is it pairs so well with a cigar. It really does.
It's water?
It's sparkling water.
Okay, well,
Yes.
there's some.
There's a
Yeah.
coffee shop, Onyx Coffee Shop in Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
Their pour over is they use Liquid Death, not sparkling water. They're regular water, but they think the water's so good they use it to make their coffee.
Yeah.
So
Oh, that's crazy.
No, you just blown my
Liquid
mind,
Death
man.
actually has 2, I believe, metal albums that are all made from haters' hate comments.
really,
Yeah.
dude.
It sounds like I
Sounds like a
was
lot of-
wondering if that was a band.
It sounds like a lot of people just hate on Liquid Death, man.
It's the
I'm
best.
here for it.
Yeah.
I'm here for it.
They're probably. I wonder how many band names have Liquid Death as their
a
name.
lot.
Yeah. I had at least 3 in high school.
Yeah.
Well, it is a product of the world, I guess. But it's if it provides any kind of nourishment,
You're with it.
then I'm with it.
Yeah.
Ironic,
It
given the
hydrates.
name.
Yes.
Right? Yes.
Yeah.
Liquid Death
Makes you feel alive.
makes you feel alive.
yes. Okay.
Meanwhile, Nashville Brewing Company, Oktoberfest.
Oktoberfest.
Cheers.
What do you got?
Honestly, I've got the lightest beer
I
they
see
have.
that. Yeah.
I'm not drinking anything dark.
Yeah.
Man, there's a time and a place for everything.
Yeah.
Shine on, you crazy diamond.
Yeah. I mean, this is what I'm
Yeah.
drinking.
Are you a Pink Floyd fan?
Was it obvious?
Pink Floyd, in my opinion, Pink Floyd is the greatest band of all time. That's my opinion.
Well,
That's a big claim. I'm not going to contest you on it.
no.
Second is the Eagles for me.
That I might contest you on.
And that's fine.
To each their own.
Favorite Pink Floyd album?
I'll tell you
Dark
mine.
Side of the Moon, hands down, not a
Hands
question.
down, I think Dark Side of the Moon's third in mine. Obscured by Clouds is number 1, easily. Number 2, Animals. Number 3, Dark Side of the Moon.
Big fan of Animals. I would have to say Dark Side of the Moon is my favorite. One of the greatest birthday gifts I've ever gotten was a vinyl of the record. That was awesome. I
That's
I have that on
class.
vinyl
listened
as
to
well.
it all the time.
That's class.
That was really what helped me get into it. Love Animals.
Oh, man.
I do like Wish You Were Here. I think
Mm.
the Wall is going to just be slightly higher than that.
The
Just
Wall-
slightly.
The Wall's kind of weird, but I had a stage where
Yeah.
Mhm.
it was number 1.
Yeah.
Mhm.
It's all right.
I don't know if it's ever been my number one.
Or
but
is no one for Obscured by Clouds? I mean, seriously?
it's. I don't know if I've listened to much of
You
that
need
one.
to listen to it, start to finish.
When
What's
did
this
that one come
podcast about again?
It's about everything.
So far, we've been on cigars and drinks
out?
and
We're working
metal.
our way into it.
yes. We're just
Coming
trying to-
full
This is
circle.
our icebreaker.
It's all the
Yeah.
finer things.
Yes.
This is the finer things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, so Obscured by Clouds, I want to say was like 72.
Wow. If only
Check
this-
it, Jamie. What year did Obscured by Clouds Pink Floyd come out? This is what you're here for, man.
I thought we were going to call him Marky Mark.
My first
Marky, all right,
pass.
Marky Mark. Obscured by
Oh,
Clouds.
man.
When did it come out?
I say, you said 72?
I'm almost positive.
Okay.
I may be wrong.
Do you guys want to make a guess?
Are we doing Prices Right rules?
I mean-
Closest without going
yeah,
over?
close.
I'm
Yeah.
just gonna
71.
Dark Side was 73, right?
Man, I don't remember. I'm
Uh,
taking a wild guess.
honestly, I have no idea. Let's say 72.
I mean,
Is that what you said?
yeah, it's 72.
Yes, dude. I know my boys.
Bonus points.
I know my boys.
Bonus points if you know the month it came out.
October.
That seems like a January album.
It was June.
Ah,
So it was recorded in 71 and published in 72.
yes.
Yeah.
And you know what it was made for? Marky Mark, does it say? Because I know. It was made for a movie. It was the soundtrack to a movie. I think it was a French romance movie.
That is correct.
Bam. I know my boys.
The whole
La Vallée.
the whole
Yep.
thing where like people say Dark Side syncs up with Wizard of Oz. Totally not true.
You did it? You tried it?
Yeah, I mean it doesn't. It just I was really disappointed.
Okay, all right.
I
So
tried
Dark
it
Side of the
too.
Moon, y'all's
Yeah.
favorite. What is your favorite song off Dark Side of the Moon?
Mm. Money.
Oh, Money's the best
Money.
song on there.
I love Brain Damage.
Brain Damage is good.
Absolutely.
Money. I love how the little sounds in
Boom,
the cash register.
I'm gonna revise that. Us and Them is my favorite.
All right,
That's
us
pretty
Hands down. my
That one
favorite.
makes you think.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's so good. And then you have the classic vocal delay. That's such a Pink Floyd thing.
Who wants to imitate the great gig in
Okay.
the sky?
Okay.
Who's going to sing for us the great gig in the sky?
I'm not gonna.
We'll
do
do that on the bonus features.
Is that the B-reel?
Yeah.
We're going to have B-reel on this?
Okay, all right, here we go. Here we go.
If I have to.
All right, still
All
on
right.
the Pink Floyd. We're still on Pink Floyd. For
Still
a
in Pink
second.
Floyd. Okay.
So, does anybody?
Jesus will come eventually.
Yes. Does
Pink Floyd, guys.
Does anybody know the original founder of Pink Floyd?
Was that Waters?
No.
Was it Sid Barrett?
It was Sid Barrett.
Yeah.
Does anybody know what happened to Sid Barrett?
He got ousted.
Do you know why he got ousted?
Actually, no. I don't.
So Sid Barrett was the original founder of Pink Floyd. Big drug guy, obviously back in the 60s and
Yeah.
70s.
Mhm.
He starts Pink Floyd. So actually, David Gilmour was a backup guitarist for Jimi Hendrix Experience. So they found him at some venue or some concert deal. They asked him to start playing for Pink Floyd to be the lead guitarist because, Roger started playing bass.
Mhm.
Sid was the vocalist. They asked David to come on as lead guitarist. He comes on. Well, they found out David Gilmour is a great writer, even sings quite a bit as the band goes on.
Oh, yeah. He sings a
Sid
lot
gets
of the videos.
jealous.
Yeah.
Sid is on an acid trip one day at a concert. It's no lie. In the middle of the concert, he drops his mic, turns away from the crowd, stares at David for the entire concert. After they're like, Sid, that was super weird. You got to go. Kick him out. He moves into his parents' attic
Mhm.
and gains like 150 pounds, loses all of his hair. He ages like 25 years in a matter of a couple years. He shows up while they're recording Dark Side of the Moon to the studio. They don't even recognize him. They're like, who are you? He's like, it's Sid. And they're like, what happened to you? A couple years later, he dies.
Oh, wow. Very sad story. That's a great way to start this podcast.
On that note,
Yeah.
On that note,
wow.
Wow.
So,
it just goes to show.
I'm a
don't-
big Pink Floyd fan.
Shine on, you
Don't
crazy
start a
dog.
band and then just be really weird,
Weird
about
about
it.
it.
Yes.
Don't do acid, kids.
Clearly
Don't
don't
do
do
acid.
acid.
Don't
Yes.
do acid.
Or
So-
DMT or anything.
Speaking of Charles, this is kind of our first time being together. I mean, straight up, like
It's a pleasure,
we
man.
we pass through each other on men's events and church, but never had a sit down combo.
Dude,
man.
honored to be here. Appreciate you guys.
So I
having
kind
me
of just
join.
want to know.
So excited to have you here, man.
First off, all right, here's some questions, and you can go through them how you want.
Oh, dear.
How did you come to faith in our Lord Jesus Christ? What's your kind of story before that, and kind of what it's been after? And how'd you find TMC? How'd you get connected?
Man, that's a lot of ground to cover.
Yeah, let's cover it, man. I got
Alright,
nowhere to
well.
be.
So, and my own story isn't really interesting, but at least I don't find it terribly interesting. It's just I was raised by Christians and raised in the church. And age 12, I said, I'm not going to ride my parents' faith. It's my own, and I'm going to live like this. So, relatively young, but having been surrounded by it all my life, I got baptized. Background though, I got 3 generations of Christians on both sides of the family. Like some people are first generation Christian. Like, man, I'm the first in my
generation.
family
Yeah.
to be in the faith. I had 3 generations on both sides. Back in the 1930s, a Nashville-based traveling preacher was having a tent revival in Texas. And during the altar call, a local man responded. Later, that preacher's great nephew married the responder's granddaughter, and they were my parents. My twice great uncle on one side baptized and brought to Christ and started the Christian experience of the family of my great grandfather on my mother's side.
Wow,
That's cool.
that's
Man.
really cool.
And that was 3 generations later, and actually people came together, and then they realized, oh man, there's some story here.
Yeah.
So just always raised in the faith, and always a Bible, and always reference to Jesus, and then at some point you start to own it for yourself. And that's gradual. Of course, the decision to live that way, it's kind of like saying I love you. When a 4-year-old says I love you, you take that in context of what that kid means. And when the 20-year-old, when the 50-year-old, when someone's on their 50th wedding anniversary and they say, I love you, how much more does that mean? So me saying at age 12, all right, I want to live for Jesus, that meant something, but it's meant more in the subsequent time.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And now I've been married 12 years. I got a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old, and it's an absolute party. And
It is a
let me tell you, none of you have kids, right? No, none of you have kids.
By the time
He's
this,
soon to be a dad.
before we record the next episode of Jesus Launch, I will be a dad.
Mm-hmm.
That's a given fact.
I have no idea, bro. Congratulations.
Yes, before the next episode. Our due date is November 16th, but he is measuring 3 weeks ahead.
Congratulations.
Right now, my son is in the womb and he's 6 pounds. So
That's
he's
exciting,
ready to
man.
roll.
But just be prepared, because the first time you hold your own kid, I don't know, for a man, because I got no other experience to share, there's something in your head. I don't know if it's a program that never ran before or if it's something that gets rewired, but you just, suddenly you think different and you live different. And as you're holding that kid and you realize this is how God sees us, everything changes, man.
Mm-hmm.
It's cool.
Yep.
It's really cool.
Yeah.
So I'm just trying to surround myself with people that are going to encourage me to live more in that way, and be more faithful in that, and understand more what it means to be a believer and a follower of Jesus, but still relying on grace.
Mm-hmm.
More and more every day, appreciating, oh man, I drink deep, the fountain of grace.
Yep. Yep.
It's not a very unique story, but there it is.
So my story's a lot different, but from your experiences, did you ever have like a faith crisis, or was there ever time you questioned, or was it just like, I know this to be true and I'm with it, I'm rolling with it?
No. Someone asked Tim Keller, do you really believe the things that you are preaching and espousing? And he said, more than ever before. And that's what I'd say too.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you weren't to admit that there's unknowns and that is the potential for doubt, then you're not being honest with yourself. But the more time that I've lived and I've considered, the more confident I've been. So the presence of doubt, that's kind of an always thing, because there's always unknowns and there always will be. But I've only become more confident with time.
Yeah,
I agree.
For me, it's just continuing. Just the more I read the Bible, the more I interact with people at our church, and really just I think when you just get older too. I mean, for me, I feel like I'm in that same boat. Like I just, you know, there was a time when I really was just looking for answers. Like, is this real? And I'm so like thankful for at that time. That was also when I went to our church and got connected to community. And now it's just continuing to just see more of God, of
He
Jesus.
lost it.
I lost it. I was going for a record.
Dude,
I was going for the record.
That was
Yeah.
impressive.
Wow.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we got a vacuum around here somewhere.
Yeah, we'll be
all right.
We're at a cigar lounge. So.
Yeah.
It can't be the first time.
Well,
You did get ash on your pants, but it
it
wasn't
will-
your fault.
It will happen at some
Yeah.
point.
You didn't realize someone else was going to christen both you
I know.
and your MacBook.
It's a running thing,
Yeah.
man. We gotta keep it going.
So
Yeah.
Charles, what about Team C? Kind of how's that? Like, how'd you find Team C? Like, what was that all about?
Dude, it's totally a God thing. Let me tell you, when you land in just the right place under such bizarre circumstances and you realize there's no way to explain this but God, you're overwhelmingly grateful. So I'm a Tennessee native, but I was living in Massachusetts for 7 years. I'm pointing to New England on a map. There's a map in front of me. I'm pointing to New England. I was in...
It's just above
Also,
here.
I've been to
That's our
Massachusetts,
CGI.
Boston. There's top 3 in the places that I've ever been. It's
Boston's
amazing.
a cool joint. Yeah, I was an hour outside of there in Worcester, really a little beyond that in Holden, little town. But it's from the coast. There's just urban sprawl from Boston, Framingham, on and on to Worcester, and then the woods and
Mm-hmm.
a little peace and quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were right on the edge of where everything got a little quieter out there. And I was working at an urgent care. So I work in healthcare, and I was working at an urgent care at the time. And then that whole COVID-19 thing hit. And I thought, well, this is a big deal. We're going to have to change a little bit. But hey, I work in acute illness, so I'm going to see plenty of people here.
Mm-hmm.
But all the routine stuff of sprained ankles and every other little thing weren't coming in the door. Our 2 hospitals and 2 urgent cares and several other specialty offices, our group was bleeding $5 million a month in revenue. And that hurts. So they said everybody is getting 50% furlough across the board, unless someone's willing to take 100%, and then we'll divvy up your hours among everyone else. Well, I had student loans and a mortgage, both of which could be deferred. Both companies said, we will put your payments on pause if you lose your income due to COVID. I thought, not everybody's got that arrangement. So tell you what, for 1 month, I'll take 100% furlough. And so I got a ham radio license. Like, what do you do? I don't know. Here's something fun. Study and take a license for ham radio. Take a test for ham radio license, because whatever, it's a month off.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone else got my hours because they didn't necessarily have the ability to defer payments on their debts. 1 month became 5. And then we said, this is stupid, man. Let's just move back to Tennessee. My second kid was born
during COVID.
In July. 3 weeks later, we moved to Tennessee. And my family was here. My mother was here. And she said, you can live with me as long as you need, a year, 2 years, whatever, until you find a home, find a job. I drove 1,200 miles 7 times in 11 weeks. I'd never driven dude, this is ridiculous. It's such a tangent, but it's so ridiculous. I'd never driven an RV before. But I got a toddler and a newborn and a wife, and we're not pulling over every hour to nurse a kid. It's going to take us days to make that trip.
Yeah.
So I just rented an RV for the first time, and the family's all in the back while I drive. And then I had to drive it back. And then I drove my vehicle down and drove my mother's back and then donated it. And then I'd never driven a 26-foot moving van before, or towed a car, but I did both at the same time as I packed up the house to sell everything.
Up in Massachusetts.
Up in Massachusetts. And during the last leg, I said, you know what? I usually have a firearm on me, but this occasion I don't. So I don't need to avoid New York. I'll just drive through New York. I'll go around the perimeter of New York City rather than Scranton and South. I'll save a couple hours. Man, I wasn't paying attention when the GPS directed me. It was too late when I realized I'm going straight through Manhattan in a 26-foot truck that I've never driven before, with a car on a trailer behind it, which I've never done before. Driving through Manhattan, what am I thinking? I was white-knuckling it and got through without any wrecks. Got back. Life's good.
To Tennessee.
To Tennessee. And we settled there in September of 2020. And then said, okay, I don't have a job. I don't have student loans, though, because I sold a home and killed my student loans. Start the job hunt. It might be a year before I have a paycheck. It might be a year or 2 before I have a house, because I don't know where I need to live in this area. And then I can start looking for a church. 2 weeks later, I meet the most phenomenal, godly man who owns a clinic, and an old friend from age 12 called and said, welcome back to town. We're looking to hire somebody.
Pause. Where were you? Where's your mom at? Where are y'all living at this time in Tennessee?
She was on the south side of Nashville near the Brentwood line.
Okay.
And now we're in Hendersonville.
Okay, so keep going.
So 2 weeks after arriving, I meet this guy, and holy crap, dude, you're an answer to prayer. You're an answer to prayer. And we start working together. And then we say, well, let's start the job hunt. The house hunt. This might take another year. 6 weeks later, we're signing papers.
So
and
you
then
bought a house.
And then we bought a house in Hendersonville, because I know where I'm working. Now I know where I need to live. And then the real estate agent said, is there anything else I can help you with? And we said, well, now we're looking for a church. Her name was Jessica Stahl. And she said, I know a place, because she's the head of children's ministry at this church. So we went there.
Yeah.
Dude,
she runs the show.
She is magnificent.
Yeah.
And we found a church.
Basically,
yeah,
if COVID didn't happen, this wouldn't be happening right here, right now.
Not under these circumstances.
And if Jessica Stahl wasn't a real estate agent and didn't go to Team C, and you didn't happen to hit.
So many things lined up.
Yeah.
So many years. I had already intended to move back to Tennessee in 4 years, 5 years, because I got another, $50,000 of student loans, and they're going to follow me wherever I go. I can't quit a job.
Yeah.
It's going to take me another 4 years to move out of Massachusetts and get home to Tennessee. Nope. Sell that home. It had appreciated 50% in 6 years. Just God just lined up one thing after another. And so it is such bizarre circumstances and so wild to reflect on, but I got to give credit to him. Now I'm in such a good place, surrounded by such good people. Not a dime.
All right. So Jessica Stahl invites you to Team C.
Yeah.
And how did you feel? Like, did it feel like home, or how did you feel?
Man, when we moved to New England and we started church hunting, we went to so many places and saw some interesting experiences. I'll keep it constructive and just leave it at that. But we started to learn after, prayerfully considering churches in New England, like there's some very specific, immediate indicators of the way they treat scripture, the way so many different things, not just do you prefer a cappella or instrumental worship, but very fundamental theological ideas that we navigated in. Some things were pretty out there in New England. There were some solid believers, some really grounded believers in New England. We just didn't find them first. And so as soon as I already had this checklist of what we'd done years prior, and we went to our first church and we just said, man, God has lined up everything. And this first Sunday, we're here. I cut my first tithing check that day. We just said, we're here.
Yeah.
Listening to this man preach, listening to the way the way that all the indicators we can hear theologically, the people we're talking to, this is home. God has led us here.
Wow.
That much confidence and not a shred of doubt since then.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's been a delight.
That's incredible.
Getting to know all you guys.
Oh,
Seriously.
yes.
Yeah.
That is awesome. Mark, I'm going to let you chime in here. What was your, and for anyone listening, we're referencing TMC, also known as, the acronym should be different, the greatest church in the world. What's that acronym? TG.
T.
ITC, ITW, TGITW.
That acronym
TGI Friday
is what we should be calling ourselves.
It
But
doesn't really
TMC
ring.
is the church everyone in this room attends.
It doesn't roll off the tongue, really.
The movement church.
The movement church.
movement
It's the
church.
greatest church. And that's how we all got connected. Mark, what's your experience? Because we connected pretty early on.
Yeah.
I saw you. I thought this guy looks like he can vibe out, and let's see what he's about, man.
Yeah, so I moved to Tennessee November, so it's almost been a year now.
Oh, wow.
Of 2021. Yeah. So I was looking for a church for a while. I moved out here. I had just proposed to my girlfriend at the time, so recently engaged, and
Excellent.
I was like, I had a really good church community back at the church I was coming from in Los Angeles, and I love them there. And the pastor and the young adults pastor did a lot of counseling for me and my now wife at the time. And so leaving that community was really, really hard. And I searched for churches out here, and a lot of them were like what I call checkbox churches, where it's like people show up, check the box that they went to church, and leave. And the first time I went to TMC, it was actually like 35 minutes from where I was living, but I worked at a Publix nearby, was driving by. I was like, there's a church in a shopping center. I got to look it up. Looked on their website. I'm like, all right, looks
Interesting.
cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So I went there one Sunday. I was probably like 20 minutes late as usual.
Fashionably late.
Yeah.
Yeah, fashionably late. They were
Yeah.
still halfway through worship, so we were good.
You're doing better than the majority of people.
yeah, exactly. So, but someone ushered me to a seat, and it was next to Trey and his wife Bailey. So it's weird when I'm not with my wife. I feel so out of my element. I get like anxious, like social anxiety, and like I'm really extroverted, but like those first time experiences are hard for me.
Yeah, I feel worried. I feel you on that.
Yeah. So, but like, as soon as like it was greeting time, like they immediately greeted me, and like basically asked my whole story within like that 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And I just felt so welcomed right away. Chandler, who was on the podcast last time, he came up to me too right after and invited me out to lunch that day. Like, unfortunately I had to work, but I would have took him up on that. Like, just such an inviting community.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I want to go back. And since then I haven't left. And then me and my wife got married in March, and she moved out here with me.
Only since March.
Yeah, I know.
Oh,
It's been like 7 months now. So, but yeah, she went there and she liked it as well. So we've been there since. I mean, it's still I grew up in small churches, but they're very like traditional Southern Baptist type churches and a lot of older people. So like coming from a place with a big young community now to this and getting another taste of that was super helpful to like my growth, I'd say. So.
I think what I like about TMC as far as the community aspect is there are kind of numerous layers to it. So that feel that I get of like a younger, vibrant community stretches across multiple generations. You know?
Absolutely.
So I feel that vibrancy from somebody like, not calling Charles old, but somebody that's older than me.
Different
Couple
generations.
Seasons.
Yeah. Different seasons.
Yeah.
And I feel like
I'm 35. What do I have, like 5 or 8 years on you?
Oh no, you got 12.
Okay, so
He's young.
Yeah, I'm 23.
Cool.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like that. Like we're sitting here.
We're in the same cohort.
Yeah. So I feel
Mhm.
like that the vibrancy and the connection from multiple generations is something you don't see a lot.
A textured community.
Yeah.
Yeah, and yet there's such a spiritual maturity with everyone there.
Yeah.
I feel like too, and even the ones that are newer Christians. I mean, I think that really to have people that have been Christians for years and years. I mean, I think it's great to have this community be together to help guide those, and then offer different perspectives. We're all in different walks of life, and I think that really it just allows for such a great, diverse community in a church to have that, and
Absolute.
it's just a blessing. It really is, and I hope that people. I mean, obviously, not everyone can go to the Movement Church, but wherever you are that you listening to this, I hope that you can find a church like that, because it really, I mean, that's what a church is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a community of believers just living as a body of Christ. It really is a great thing. And
to be in a room when as I walk in this room, every person here, they look different. They do different things throughout the week for a living, different stages of life, but they're all about, I want to know Jesus more. I want to encourage you, and I want to be encouraged. Help me, sharpen me as I try to sharpen you.
yes,
Everybody in that room, everybody in that assembly is about that, and it's delightful.
Yes. So
Man.
Charles, how did you get into healthcare? What was that like for you?
Oh, man. From age 5, I wanted to do something with science. From age 12, I wanted to do healthcare. And I'm a physician assistant, so it's a just in case anybody doesn't know, because that's a little bit niche, doing what a doctor does, trained in the medical model, but it's with a master's degree. So you take 3/4 of medical school, fit it into half the time, and then rather than a residency afterward, you do on-the-job training. So rather than what would be 4 years medical school, 4 or 6 years or more of residency, and $400,000 of debt, and then board certification in one field. That's your field. That's your one field. Instead, I've got relatively less school, not the same depth, but the vast majority of healthcare stuff, depending on the field you're working in. You're trained as a generalist. You do rotations through school, and I got so many cool experiences. And I have take the same patient, the same medical evidence, the same intervention for the same outcome, but I didn't have to do nearly as much school. I didn't have to get $500,000 in debt. I cost the system less money. You get into the more challenging, deeper cases, like, okay, for you, your complexity, your depth, we need the person who's been through medical school, residency, board certification. They are the only one you should be talking to right now. But the vast majority of healthcare stuff, a physician assistant could do anything that a doctor could. And the real gold in that is lateral mobility. I worked urgent care straight out of school. Now I'm in primary care. It's men's health, primary care with a niche in endocrinology. I could go do dermatology. I could jump into surgery, the ER. Doctors don't have that freedom, and I was afraid of getting into a path and not liking it, but then I'm stuck and committed. And incidentally, now I'm doing a thing that I love so much, I can't imagine leaving it for anything else. But I entered the PA profession because I was just a little bit overwhelmed by the options and afraid of committing to one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, man.
So just have fun being a nerd, digging into medical evidence, making people feel better. The nature of our particular practice, I'm not doing a plug for our business, but the thing that I get to do is start with someone's medical health. We're doing testosterone replacement therapy for the vast majority. Some come just for primary care. That's cool. But a lot come to us for testosterone replacement therapy. There's a frequency of visits with that. Our demographic, you go to the doctor. Men go to the doctor once a year at most, maybe every 10 years, depending on how much their wives are badgering them. But I've got a thing which has extremely tangible, wild benefits when you have a hormone deficiency and you correct it. But the ongoing management makes me see them so frequently. While I'm here, I'm dialing in your blood pressure. I'm helping you with your diabetes, your fitness, your whatever. And our clinic, man, let me help connect you into resources for your career. Let me cry with you about your family member who died. Let me help hook you up with counseling because your marriage is struggling. Let me celebrate with you as your kid graduates school or whatever. When I walk in that exam room, the priority of my boss and why I love working with him is invest in that patient in every way possible, elevate him medically, spiritually, relationally, emotionally, in every way possible. And if you got a 10-minute visit, groovy. If Charles doesn't walk out of that room for a half hour, something came up and we just cover. As our patients are coming in, the 5 PAs we have on staff who are just rolling, seeing patients. If one's tied up, we just say, he was needed. We're going to cover for him. We just flow to take care of whoever's on the schedule. Accommodating, man, this guy, I don't know what's going on behind that door, but in this exam room, something big needed to be discussed. And we let it happen.
Dang.
It's a thrill to do that kind of work. And I get to pray with my patients. I used to do that in urgent care, but I was kind of low key about it because the leadership would not dig that kind of thing. But hey, if I pick up that this person's a believer and they're going through a thing, I offer to pray with them. Man, here it's overt. It's not a preachy thing. If I don't share that faith with this patient, that's cool. I'm going to do for you whatever I can. I'll tell them, man, I don't know if this means anything to you, but I appreciate you confiding whatever this struggle is, and I'm praying for you. If that means anything to you. Yeah. And I've had a patient, say like, thank you so much. I'm a believer and that means a lot to me. I've had others say, well, I don't share that faith, but what I hear is you're doing everything that you think you can in that way as well. And I appreciate that. Even the people who aren't believers, when I mention that, they say, man, I know where you're coming from.
That's cool.
And I respect it, even if I don't agree on the authority of prayer. That particular patient is so cool. It blows my mind.
Wow.
It's a lot of fun.
I'm going to move to the next one, but I want to hear more about your life experiences. What have you enjoyed about, we've got 3 married men, 1 man that'll be the best husband in the world, best dad in the world. I know it. Like what's your experience with marriage? Like what's been challenging things? What have you, like, what gets you, what's exciting about it? Like, what do you
asked some big questions, man.
Yeah,
you asked some mild, wide questions. I hope you're not looking for inch-wide answers on them. So many people said when you first get married, you're trying to fit 2 lives together, and there's all this, learning how to share responsibilities and giving one thing up for another. It was a party.
Yeah, dude.
Man, it's an absolute party. And yeah, there's times you disagree on stuff. You got to talk through things or even argue and say, all right, we'll come back to this when we're feeling a little cooler. But that's only natural. If you can do that in a healthy way, that's not a bad thing to have disagreements. It's been the most, see if this means something to you. I was not the man that I needed to be until it was required of me. So as a kid, my parents would give me responsibility, and that new bar, I would have to rise up to it. Like, okay, you're now older, you're now responsible for whatever. And so I saw, okay, I need to step up to that level. Getting married was yet another way, man. And now things will happen, like my little 2-year-old girl, I was up late working and I heard her coughing in her bedroom, and then I heard I realized, oh crap. Run up there to find this toddler is actually lying in her own vomit. I mean, she could aspirate, that could hit her lungs. So, okay, sit this girl up, change her clothes, and immediately lights on, my wife runs in. This girl vomited like 3 times in the night. We keep changing her clothes and keep taking care of her. And I didn't think for a second about how, man, I got stuff to be doing. Man, it's late. I'd rather be sleeping. I just thought, there's a need, man.
Yeah.
What can I do for this person that I want to do everything I possibly can for? And the following morning on reflection, I realized, man, a younger me wouldn't have responded that way.
Yeah.
But having that child rely on me for everything, that was just a bar that it brought out something in me.
Man,
And
that's
it's
a good way
cool.
to put it.
Marriage and parenthood has just continually brought out more in me because it's demanded more of me, and it's a sanctifying, edifying, humbling experience, but it's a joyful one, man, because I'm not about pride. I'm not here to try to hide ways I need to grow, mistakes I made. I actually eagerly share the mistakes I've made because I would love for you to learn that lesson without paying the tuition. I paid for it. Maybe you can hear my story and not make the same mistake. The lessons you buy, the bought lessons stick with you more than the taught lessons.
Definitely.
Many still got to figure it out for themselves, but man, it has been a growing experience and a joyful one. A joyful one.
Yep.
You'll find out soon.
I love when I hear
Parenthood, anyway.
I hear man, you just hear so many people banter on about marriage, and it just drives me crazy. So I love to hear an experience where people are joyful and appreciative of it, because in my experience, a year in, it is the greatest ride ever.
It's fun, man.
That's great, man.
It's fun. And it's not even about stuff like, okay, we can do anything we want in the bedroom and God approves. It's not that kind of thing.
Yeah.
That's an element, but that's cool. But just the fact that I'm committed to you. I'm committed to you, and I'm going nowhere. And the security that comes with that.
Yep.
So many people approach things by saying, I'm willing to go a mile. I hope that lands me something well. Oh, wait, that good place is 2 miles away. I'm not going to go. No, instead you say, that's where I'm going. And I don't care how long it takes me to get there. It's not, here's how much effort I'm willing to put in. Maybe I'll actually get somewhere. It's, that's where I'm going. My marriage is going to be strong. It's going to last. I'm going to be there for my kids. They're not going to be the statistic of a fatherless home. And I'm going to put forth any effort it takes to get there. You just take your priority. Is it result as a priority, or the amount of effort that you're limiting yourself to is a priority? If you just say, that's the result I want, whatever it requires of me, I'm not exactly sure, but I'm going to do it. When two people are committed to each other in that way, there's such security and there's such freedom and such joy.
Yep. Charles, I appreciate you sharing, man. That was...
Bro, appreciate you asking.
Man.
I'm not the only one with that experience. I'm kind of an average Joe in many ways, but it's fun. It's fun expressing that gratitude.
Yeah. Now we're going to get into the thick of things. Chad, I want you to chime us off. Get us, you're up to bat. So we're going to talk about things we're going to really dive in today for the topic of tonight is the humanity of Jesus. All right. So we've established some things about Jesus. We talked little bit last episode with Chandler and the episode previously about establishing the validity of who Jesus is in historical context, that he was real He did die. He did resurrect from the grave. It's a proven fact, cannot be argued. But we haven't got, and we've talked a little bit about some of his perspectives on things, but we haven't gotten into him as a person.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, right now that I do the pastoring or directioning of the youth at our church,
Yes.
and we're spending 2 years, all of this year and all of next year, on the humanity of Jesus in the book of John, talking about his personality traits, you know, who he is, what he says, what he thinks. Because ultimately, two things, we can't say we believe in somebody that we don't know who he is. Like, it's like, tell people my best friend's Chad Carter, like, oh, well, why's he your best friend? Tell me about him. I'm like, yeah, well, my parents told me about him and told me I should believe that he's my best friend. It's like, well, that doesn't hold a lot of weight. So we spend a lot of time learning who he is as a person so that we could tell other people about him. And so that the more you learn about somebody, the more you'll love them, the more you'll fall in love with them.
This is natural.
Tonight we're going to talk about some of the human concepts of Jesus. And the first one and Chad, chime in, did Jesus struggle with sin? And kind of the one text, one scripture example we can kind of connect to, and Mark can pull up the verses. It is when Jesus goes to the desert, and he fasts for 40 days, doesn't eat, doesn't drink, and then he comes face to face with Satan, with the enemy, and he is tempted externally. And when Mark gets pulled up, he can read us the actual verses. But did he, in his daily life, for the first 30 years, for the last 3 years, did he internally struggle with sin?
Well, I would say, I mean, depending on like if you say when you say struggle with sin, I feel like for if we're just talking about us, like us Christians struggling with sin, I feel like that would also imply like it's a sin that we're struggling with. So maybe it's a sin that we actually act out from time to time, but we're trying not to sin. So I would say in that sense, no, I don't think Jesus struggled with sin, but yes, he was tempted. And being tempted alone, that alone is not a sin. It's not a sin to be tempted.
Because it even says that God tempts people.
Right.
Or tempts people, but there are certain, help me.
Well, there are ways that God allows people to be tempted.
Yes,
right?
Yes, that's what I meant to say.
And so God definitely allowed Jesus to be tempted. I mean, in the wilderness, Satan tempts him. I mean, saying, "Look, I mean, you can, if you're hungry, you haven't eaten for 40 days, just
turn that rock into bread.
Turn that rock into bread."
Mark, you got those verses?
I do.
All right, read them off to us. That way we know what we're talking about.
You want me to just kind of like read the passage here?
Yeah, just from when he's in the desert and then his conversation with Satan.
All right. So in Matthew 4, it says, and we're going to start at verse 1. Then Jesus was led up by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. And the tempter came and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread." But he answered, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God."
Facts.
Then the devil took him to the holy city and set him on the pinnacle of the temple and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down, for it is written, he will command his angels concerning you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." Then Jesus said to him, "Again it is written, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test." Again the devil took him to a very high mountain and showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory. And he said to him, "All these I will give you, if you will fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said to him, "Begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." Then the devil left him, and behold, the angels came and were ministering to him.
And I would probably say after 40 days in the desert, only Jesus would probably be the only one that would not be
take
tempted.
him up on his offer and not take Satan up on his offer, especially the food one.
Yes.
It wouldn't take me that long.
It wouldn't take 40 days.
The devil out here quoting scripture to Jesus.
It's
Yeah,
pretty-
trying to.
He knows.
I mean, that's
He knows the
ironic.
word. Yes.
Oh,
Like, who do you think you are?
I know.
Yeah.
I am the Word.
Yes.
Son, I created
Well,
you.
you know, there's also a text that says that Satan and his legions know the Bible better than most. Because, I mean, in order to deceive people, that you got to know what you're deceiving them of.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I mean, that's a really interesting thing to think about. But yeah, I mean, you see that Jesus is tempted, but he's able to successfully fight against it.
Yeah.
And I think it, I mean, he was a human, so I'm sure physically he was struggling. I'm sure there were at times mentally that he was drained. He was, we see, I mean, in the show The Chosen, I think they do a great job of like depicting on what it would have been like for Jesus to be healing people from sun up to sundown. That's draining.
yeah.
And I think it's,
Charles works in healthcare. So
I don't
he
even
knows.
do it as well as him, and I'm tired at the end
so
of the
you
day.
know.
Yes.
In a
And
sense.
so it really is incredible to see how he still does not falter. And that just goes to show that, yes, he's a human. Yes, he needs food. He needs nourishment. He gets tired. But he is truly showing how God is the provider,
Yeah.
the ultimate provider.
Yeah.
And it's a great example, I think, for us. Hopefully, we're not put in that situation that he was specifically. But I think I think Jesus can show us how to struggle and what we should do during
Yeah.
that. And that
That's a good
is
point.
to go to God.
Mhm.
So did he struggle with sin? No, I don't think he did. But he was a human when he was on earth. And we see many times where he's stressed, where he's sad, and where he's happy and joyful. And I think that also goes to show, like, it's not a sin to have emotions.
Yeah.
Anger.
Mm-hmm.
In your anger, do not sin,
Mhm.
we are told. And we see Jesus at times being indignant
Yes.
without sin.
Well, you know,
Yes.
too, a good way, John Montgomery, two things. One way he puts it as Jesus basically succumbed himself to the full human experience,
Mhm.
minus sin.
Mhm.
So the emotional part, the stress part, the anger part of seeing his
Yeah.
people being neglected and put on the margins.
Yeah.
So he was succumbed to the full human experience. And I think that's what separates him from the other gods. He came down the mountain.
He did.
All the other gods are on the mountain.
Yeah, like in Greek mythology and
Greek mythology, in Hinduism, even especially in the Quran and in that culture,
Mhm.
it is this ascension that you have to,
Can you meet the mark?
can you
Mhm.
meet this mark? Jesus comes down the mountain
Yep.
and is in the full experience. And so that is kind of one of the things that people press back on is, well, okay, well, if he was a human, then he couldn't have been perfect.
Mhm.
But as you
Yeah.
see here, him in his most vulnerable state, he still didn't sin.
Yeah.
And John Montgomery then goes on to say that going in the desert and battling Satan with scripture, because that's all Jesus battled with, was he just presented more scripture. He said,
Right.
okay, well, do you know that it is written
Yes.
blank?
Mhm.
It is written blank. And so he had clarity. So
Mhm.
I think those 40 days were challenging, but they were also clarifying, that they showed him. Like, I think that the reason Jesus waited 30 years to start his ministry is because he was immature, because he's in the full human experience. And so for him to have growth and for him to reach that point, he spent a lot of time with the Father
Yeah.
here as a human. And so for him to have that clarity And like you said, we couldn't do it because we didn't live like Jesus did for 30 years. And so we couldn't battle Satan like that. So I do think that's a tandem that that separates Jesus and makes Jesus so much more relatable.
Yeah.
Is that he did experience what it meant to be a human.
Yes.
And so when we come to him, he's like, I understand.
He understands the hearts of every man because he lived it. He was a man, and fully God, but he was fully man. And I think we can be confident then that Jesus knows what we struggle with.
Yeah.
Because he struggled worse than anyone else has ever had, physically and mentally.
Yeah.
And you see what you see how he deals with it, and I think that is such a great hope for all of us because we see how he was vindicated. I mean, he's at the right hand of the Father through his struggles, and we can look at things that we deal with in our lives, which is probably on such a smaller scale than what he had to deal with, but we can see that through these struggles, we will be vindicated.
Yeah.
If not in our life, then after death.
Yeah.
May I emphasize two things that you guys said that really resonate with me. Number one is we got to define the terms. Did Jesus struggle with sin?
Mhm.
How do you define that?
Yes.
Because the way I generally think of that, I don't know, this is the definition with which you were working when you said that, or maybe you were setting us up for a great layup with that question. But I think of struggling with sin as, man, I haven't yet set this aside. I'm doing better, but I still sometimes fall into this sin. I'm struggling with it. In that sense, we can say categorically, no, Jesus did not. We know that he did not sin, but to have experienced that temptation, if you want to call that the struggle of resisting temptation, in that sense, yes, he did.
Yeah.
And what you're saying, that's exactly true among all world religions. What other one is there where someone is deity, but they come to your level? And that's not Jesus saying, you know what, we're gonna grade on a curve. We're gonna let it slide. No, he said in the Sermon on the Mount, I tell you the truth, I didn't come to abolish the law, but to fulfill the law. Heaven and earth could pass away easier than one dot, one line could be stricken from the law, be struck from it. Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. The standard is still up there. But in our inability to reach that, he says, I'm going to bridge the gap.
Yes.
You are clothed in righteousness. The Father looks at you and he sees the righteousness of Jesus. And that, dude, if that doesn't make you just stop and think, then you just don't get it. He did come to our level to elevate us to his level. We're going to keep pursuing that perfection, the sanctification process. We're going to keep letting God refine us. But all the while, every time we fall short, there's grace for that.
And you know, he even drove the point home when he said, I didn't come to be served. If any other God would have came before men, you would have guaranteed they would have been served. He said, I didn't come to serve. I didn't come to be served. I came to serve my people. So for him to even drive the point home, and then he drives the point home again when he washes his disciples' feet, when they should have been washing his.
Yeah, and that's so significant that you're right. He did not, when he came to earth, he did not come as a ruler. I mean, he was a carpenter.
Yes. And you know what's crazy?
He was blue collar, man.
Most of the Jewish people were offended by it. And now you look back in retrospect, you're like, well, how could you be offended? But they're thinking, well, you're God. You shouldn't be a carpenter. You shouldn't be washing the feet of men.
Born in a manger, living like a homeless man.
But then he goes on to say, well, in time you'll understand that because I am God, to put myself in this position, it stretches across the board to everybody to say that the servant, that the homeless person, that the broken person can come to me. And we can have, and you know, before we got on air, me and Charles, we get to talking about Tacova boots. We get to talking about cigars. That's Jesus's way of connection, of saying, you know, because I am a servant, all servants can come to me, and we can have that relational capacity to be friends, to be brothers to love one another. That connectivity
Yeah.
is only found in Jesus. I truly believe that.
And the greatest leaders do not ask anything among humans in your job. The greatest leaders do not ask anything of someone that they're not willing to do themselves.
Yes.
One more way that I respect the person I work for, my boss, our clinic owner, so immensely. There's nothing he asks of me that he's not already doing 99% and with intention to be 100.
Mhm.
And there's just circumstances, details get in the way of him, living up to his own standard perfectly. That's just humanity.
Mhm.
But Jesus is not asking anything of us that he did not already do himself in the
Yes.
form of he who would be first must be last.
Yes.
The last would be first. The greatest among you must be the servant of all. And even John said, I'm not worthy to untie his sandals. Normally, to touch another person's feet, that's servant work. And yet John the Baptist elevated Jesus, saying, I'm not even worthy. I don't even want to touch anybody's feet, but I'm not worthy
Yeah.
to even untie his sandals.
Yeah.
That's how high he is.
Yeah.
And yet here he is washing people's feet. What?
And the paradigm is, John says that moments before Jesus lets John baptize him.
Mhm.
So it's
Right.
like he sets the standard and Jesus knocks it out of the park and is like, you're right,
Yeah.
but because
Mhm.
of our relationship, I'm going to let you baptize me, because
Yeah.
that's how close the kingdom gets. And and that's how we live out our lives, is we get close to people and we get dirty and we get in the muck so that people can see Jesus for who he was.
You meet them where they are.
Yes.
He goes
Absolutely.
to the woman on the well. He goes
Yeah.
to the prostitutes and the tax
They don't have
collectors.
to walk to his, earthly throne and
The pilgrimage to Mecca.
pilgrimage to Mecca, or even to during
Yeah.
that time, even to Jerusalem, to the temple.
Well, and in the Quran, and in that culture of serving Allah, you have to do all this in hopes that you will be selected at the end times.
Mhm.
And then in the end times, there's an obstacle course set up for you, a moral obstacle course. And if you surpass all of those, Allah will be on that side and you will be on this side. And there will be it says it in the Quran, there will be a blade as thin as hair, as sharp as the sharpest blade in the world, and as thin as hair. You have to cross it to get to him. And in our belief and in the king that we follow, he crossed that blade for us and bled
Yes.
for us.
I can believe the concept that to reach divinity, to reach that level, is such a great challenge. But you tell me that that's up to me,
Yeah.
I'm going to give up, man. I got nothing
yeah.
but despair.
Right.
You tell me that the only one who can do that did it on my behalf, there's joy, man.
Well, and let's just look. I mean, you're talking about the Islam, like what they would have to do. I mean, let's talk. What about what the Jews had to do with the law of Moses, and they couldn't even do that.
Man.
Yeah.
And nothing. And I love how Jesus doesn't say, "Oh no, that law, don't." It's not.
Tell you what, we're gonna
we're
do
gonna
round
throw
two.
that
that
out the
law,
window.
that's still a good law, and if you can follow that perfectly, you're good. But show me the person that
Did
do that, and I don't think we see anyone.
Or in the most poetic sense, you want to condemn her? Fine.
Mhm.
Whoever's without sin,
Sin.
throw the first stone.
Oh yeah,
And the only person present who had the right to condemn was Jesus.
and he
Yeah.
didn't throw the
And he
stone.
said, where are your accusers? Neither do I condemn you.
yeah. So you were telling me this interesting
Yeah.
theory on what. So we're talking about in John when.
The Pharisees go to grab a woman who has
Yeah.
been caught in adultery. They drag her out into this crowd.
Mhm.
They say, Jesus, okay, well, if you're so about the law, the
Mhm.
law says to stone this woman. What do you say? And he says, like Charles just petitioned,
Mhm.
well, I say, whoever has no sin can throw the first stone.
Mhm.
And there's I guess we'll say idea or conspiracy or whatever you want to fashion in that situation, because it says he begins to write in the dirt. So people have speculated, what was he writing? I think was what's fitting for the story is he began to write the sins of the men and the people in the crowd's sins. And one by one, they started to leave.
Starting with the oldest.
Starting with the oldest.
Yeah.
He writes their sin.
Yeah.
They bounce. And so you had
Being
this,
too old.
Yeah.
Wow.
He's got this list of sins and they start to get introspective and say, we just caught this woman in adultery, but here's my sin, and it flushes them out.
Yeah.
And it leaves Jesus and this woman. And so she's thinking, oh, well, he's the only guy with no sin. Is he going to stone me? And instead, I even think it says in the scriptures, he gets down to her level. So he bends down and looks at her eye to eye. You can imagine how she feels, like embarrassed, vulnerable, scared.
Mm.
And he goes, you're not condemned.
Mm.
You don't sin no more. And that phrase can kind of get, whatever. I think that what he is saying is he's inviting her into his life and how he perceives is because you got to think he's thinking futuristic here. He's saying sin no more, which means ultimately accept the sacrifice I will ultimately make on the sacrifice, which will invite you into no more sin.
Yeah.
So it's not that she's going to go out. I mean, because
never sin again.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, because she's a woman who clearly was caught in adultery. So it's not like she's going to flip the switch.
Well, she was a human.
She's a human.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway.
And
She's
so-
having the human experience,
Yes.
which means
And so
sin is not going to stop.
He's not saying, oh, you're not going to sin no more. He's saying you have now been invited into to eat and be at my table, which everybody at my table doesn't sin anymore in the big picture because when God sees you, he sees me. And so that's powerful because it's like, holy crap, the only man who can come before me and condemn me won't.
Yeah.
It's not in his nature.
Cool.
Yep.
Yeah.
It is.
I love that.
That is awesome, man.
So, we're going to do this together. My boy Marky Mark is going to give us the fact of the day. And then from that, we're going to lead into a comparison and we're going to talk about how is he fully divine and fully man? And I have kind of an idea of how that coincided together. So Marky Mark, hit us with it, brother.
All right, so I'm going to give you a couple facts, actually, because I think they tie in really well. Since we're going to kind of be talking about, like, Jesus being a perfect human and people who fall short and talking about David,
David the Giant Slayer.
David the Giant Slayer,
Yeah.
correct. Yeah.
That's
I
a
think
good
there's
title.
some...
He should play running back for the Cowboys, son, and Giant Slayer.
Yeah.
Micah Parsons, baby.
Yeah. But I think there's some pretty cool comparisons, honestly. So, David was from the tribe of Judah, and so is Jesus. Let's see.
Jesus a descendant of David.
Correct.
Yeah.
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 Just
David-
great grandfather.
Great. It's a few
Pretty
greats.
great.
Yeah.
David was also from Bethlehem.
Hey, two, you know what's crazy is you talk about the lineage of Jesus and how messy it got. He comes from the lineage of when David had a child with
Bathsheba.
Sheba, the woman that he had an affair with. Ultimately, that baby came from the lineage of Jesus. So you talk about getting messy and being succumbed to the human experience. Jesus' lineage got a little crazy. Keep going, Mark.
Yeah. Like I said, David was also from Bethlehem, and that's where Jesus was born.
Right. And the reason why he was born in Bethlehem was because this was the time of the census. And during the time of the census, Israelites, the Jewish people had to go to the tribe of their ancestors.
Sisters to be.
And that's Joseph, Jesus's father. That's where his ancestors were from.
Yep.
So they went back to Bethlehem.
Yeah. Also, David was God's anointed one. As we know, he was anointed by God to, be a leader. And I think that relates very well to how Jesus, was obviously God's chosen son and anointed to save everyone's sin.
Yeah.
David was a shepherd, and we know Jesus is the great shepherd. let's see. There was one more. David was Israel's greatest king until Jesus came, and he was obviously the greatest king of the world and set up a kingdom.
Yeah.
You know, I think the kinghood of David being a great king now to Jesus being a perfect king, where David messed up as a king, you know?
Mhm.
And then, yeah, I mean, I would say those are pretty much the facts that relate to David and Jesus.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mark. That's
Yeah.
awesome, man.
And two,
Yeah.
you know, Tim Keller uses the term the greater David. He uses that a lot in his preaching. He'll take
The
an Old
new
Testament.
and greater.
He'll take an Old Testament
Yeah.
figure, Moses, Jonah,
Mhm.
Solomon, and he called Jesus the greater Moses, the greater David.
Yeah.
And so Jesus is the greater David. So we'll talk a little bit about, so like, how was Jesus fully divine and fully man? And think about this before you answer. So there was a psychologist, neurologist who was a believer, and he was a kind of I cannot remember his name, but he started doing studies in like dreams and how the dream mind works. And he made a connection to Jesus. And so like, if you ever had a dream when you know you're dreaming, but you know it's a dream,
Yes.
you know what I'm talking about?
Lucid dream, right?
Lucid dream in a way
Yeah.
you're conscious enough to be like, oh, I'm in this dream, but you know it's just a dream. So they say that the way Jesus operated kind of is the same way, but you know, physically, is he had a brain, or he had a forethought of being divine,
Mhm.
being infinite, being you know, eternal.
Mhm.
And within that brain, or within that forethought, he then had a human brain. And so he was able to kind of go back and forth. So as if you're dreaming and you realize you're dreaming, but you keep telling yourself this is a dream, it will end at some point. He had this overarching idea of who he was.
Mhm.
You know, I'm God in the Trinity.
Yeah.
I'm in heaven. I'm eternal. And within that, he was a human and lived a day-to-day life
Mm.
in the same tandem, if that makes sense.
Yeah, and I think, and I don't know if this is what you're alluding to, but I think some people will also say there was a time where Jesus didn't know who he was.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't agree with that, only because, I mean, we see is it in John no, not John, Luke possibly, where he's like 12. They've taken their,
They've migrated to go to the
Yeah.
temple and go,
Right.
and go.
I don't know if migrate's a good word, but
It was during the Passover.
Passover, yes. They go to Jerusalem. They can't find Jesus. He was definitely a kid at this time.
Yep.
And they find him in the temple teaching the scribes and the people in the temple. And they ask him, you know, where were you? Why? I'm paraphrasing, but where were you? And, you know, we were looking for you. And he said, what do you mean where I am? This is my Father's house.
Mhm.
So I think he definitely knew, probably to whenever, because he was human. So, you know, I'm sure when he was an infant, you know, it wasn't until he could have, there's an age when infants, they become toddlers and they have like a conscious
Developmental
awareness.
stages.
Yeah.
Exactly,
Yeah.
like awareness. And so I think that would have happened very early on. But back to what you were saying, like having this, you know, a divinity brain in a human brain. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, yeah.
To make it more clear. Man, I just, it's hard. But it's definitely something to think about.
And a good example would be
Yeah.
when the paralytic is lowered into the house and he reads the mind
He
of
reads
the people in the room.
Yeah.
That would be a example where a human brain's not going to be able to telepathically
Sure.
know what other people are thinking.
I see what you mean.
But
Yeah.
his divine brain, it was
Yeah.
just back and forth where he could go into that, tap
Mhm.
into that, and be able to read people's mind. You know what
Yeah.
I'm saying? Because it says only God knows the thoughts of men. So if
Right.
only God knows the thoughts of men, and only his brain or only his
Mhm.
knowledge could tap into that, and then Jesus had to have access to that even when he was here on
Yeah.
earth.
I think that's where the Holy Spirit might have come in. Like he was constantly filled with the Spirit, and that gave him that ability to perform miracles, to heal, and to read the hearts of men. I think that's one way that I can think of that. And there were, I mean, in the Old Testament, when we read about the prophets and the kings, there were instances where they described them as filled with the Spirit. And during those instances, they're able to, because there were many people back in the Old Testament that were also able to perform types of miracles.
Yeah.
And they're described as being filled with the Spirit. So I guess Jesus just was probably constantly filled with that Spirit, that divine Spirit that allowed him to, while being human, to also have that divinity, I guess, and that authority.
Yeah.
Because he was also able to, just by speaking, cast demons out. He exorcised a lot of people during his ministry. It's all over the gospel. That seemed to be like, for a while, his main job was an exorcist.
Yeah.
You know, not like how Hollywood would portray it, but an actual exorcist with a 100% success rate.
Yeah, yeah.
And the demons knew who he was.
Yep.
The demons knew. They said, "What do you have to do with me? I know you are the Holy Son of God." So the demons knew who he was, even though maybe other people just saw him as human. The demons knew who he was. So that's kind of where I'm at.
May I add to that?
Please.
It's fun to speculate,
Yeah.
theorize, like, what are the mechanics of how this works? We're told
Yes.
this, we're told that.
Mm-hmm.
What's the connection? How did that really work? It's fun to think on that. It's fun to muse. It's an interesting theory.
Yeah.
Even though, admittedly, it's just a theory. When I had read that, when I've read that verse about the paralytic being lowered through the ceiling and him knowing what the people in the crowd were thinking, I just assume that's like, all right, I can tell what's happening, what I'm saying, I bet they know what they're thinking. I can sit in a room and in a conversation, read the dynamics and say, I know what these people are thinking. I can anticipate some degree of that, and I assumed that that's what Jesus is doing.
Yep.
And yet, there are other stories like the woman at the well, where he knows her story. She had run to the town and said, this man told me everything I'd ever done.
Yes.
He knew, like, that she had been married 5 times and the man she was with currently wasn't her husband. And there's no other way for him to know that unless he was sitting around while gossip was floating, and that's even further speculation. There was some degree of knowledge in various stories and verses where he couldn't have known it with a human mind.
Yes.
That particular one about the paralytic, I just assumed he was reading the room, but maybe that was another case of his divine insight.
Another one, was it Nathaniel, one of the disciples? Jesus says that he saw him
sitting under the tree.
That was another thing. Where
or even when he tells Peter he's going to deny him 3 times.
That's a big one right there.
That's pretty
and
significant.
imagine how, I'm sure Peter must have been, when he heard Jesus say that, imagine, like, I bet he took offense to that. Like, how could you say this about me? How could you?
Come on, I'm the guy.
I will never deny you.
Yeah, I'm the guy. Come on.
And then sure enough,
he did.
Sure enough.
Can I chime in for a second?
Please.
I think something that's so interesting about it is, I think Jesus, being God and human, he came down to our level, and I think to an extent suppressed himself from the full knowledge because there was things that wasn't revealed to him. But I think when Jesus is baptized, something really special happens when the Spirit comes down, right?
Like
and you see the Trinity there. You see the Father, the Spirit, and the Son.
Yeah.
And I think Jesus, at that point, letting the Spirit, this is how I've heard it recently, is kind of letting the Spirit come in and work through him. And that's when he started doing these miracles and these great things. I think it's Jesus showing, like, look, I could have all the power, but I'm letting the Holy Spirit come down and work for me. And this is what I want for you guys, right? Because it's kind of like a model for Christians. So I think Jesus could have had full access to everything, but he suppressed himself as a human and let the other attributes of God work through him.
And that's a good point. It's like, why does Jesus need to be baptized? Like, isn't he already, isn't he the one that, like, we're being baptized in his name, so why is he being baptized? But that's a very interesting way to look at that.
It is important to distinguish, though, the baptism of John was a baptism of repentance as opposed to the Holy Spirit.
That's true. Yeah.
And in doing that,
right.
it wasn't the same as the baptism like we see elsewhere in the New Testament. And this is also John who has been telling,
Yeah.
he's preparing the way.
Yes.
And so, if I'm saying I am the herald of Queen Elizabeth II, where she's still around, so let's say the king, recent
what's his
developments.
King,
or Prince Charles, whatever. I'm not up on the royal family. I don't follow it closely.
Yeah.
Whatever the case, if I claim to be the herald of some authority,
Yeah.
and then that authority comes, one of the most important things is for them to say, "Thank you, Charles, for everything you've said. I am going to endorse everything you've said." Jesus in that baptism was being obedient to the Father, all of this to fulfill all righteousness, and endorsing everything that John had said. That too, even if it wasn't baptism in the sense that we do it.
Right. And that could have been the first baptism in the sort of the sense as when we're baptized. I mean, the Spirit doesn't enter us at that moment. It's when we accept Christ.
Yep.
But that's, obviously that's that representation of that, the outwardly representation of that. We need a torch.
You got that torch.
I got you.
Also, too,
But yeah, no, that's absolutely.
another thing, this is, we could probably spend a whole podcast on. You talk about fully divine, fully human. There are two camps when it comes to when Jesus goes to the cross. Some people believe he emptied himself of divinity on the cross. And the wrath of God was poured out on the Son. That's one camp. And so then at that point, the divinity is removed so that the wrath could be poured out. And the other camp is he actually lifted himself up even higher into divinity and joined forces with the Father to defeat death. And there's a better way to articulate that. But that would be the crux of all of those ideas coming to a point when he's on the cross. Is he completely removed, or is he lifted up even higher in that moment?
I think if there's like if he loses divinity, if that means that he also loses a sense of that makes him susceptible to what humans are, which also includes sin, I would probably go against that. But I would also say that I think when he died and all of our sins were placed on him, that was probably when Jesus and God turned his head from him. That's probably the furthest that anyone's ever been from God.
Yes.
It's definitely the greatest change. I mean, he who experienced that level of communion with the Father and then this level of separation, that's definitely a greater contrast than anyone else in all of history could have ever experienced.
Yeah.
This is certain.
So,
definitely these are great things to just think about and talk about. But
it's fun to think about.
It is fun, yeah.
But in the wrapping up of it, we understand that Jesus was God in eternity. It says it in John. John 1, it talks before the foundation. This is my favorite piece of scripture.
The beginning of John.
Yes, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. So that is the stamp of approval that he is God. Jesus is just as much God as the Father and the Spirit. And he came down from the mountain. He extended his sacrifice to us. He experienced what it meant to be a human so that he could relate. And he ultimately welcomes us into no sin, because when God sees us, he sees his perfect Son. And there is no argument or speculation on that side of things. That is the gospel. That is the truth of what Jesus' life was ultimately about.
Right.
So. May I add, just because if we're touching on this topic, it's worth talking about the theological foundation. How could he be fully God and fully man? This is outside our our experience. You are one person, you are one nature. You're a human, you're Trey, period. One per customer, as R.C. Sproul put it. So the idea of having more than one nature or being part of more than one person, that's completely outside our experience.
Yeah.
So when we say there's God, and it's one God, we have one God, but in three persons, the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And that person of Jesus has two natures, being God and man, and he must be fully both, because if he isn't fully God, he couldn't have done what he came to do. He couldn't have performed perfectly. But if he wasn't fully man, whatever degree of humanity he didn't share with us would be something he did not redeem.
Yeah.
So it was absolutely necessary for him to be both.
Yeah.
And people have tried to put analogies to it. Well, it's like water. It's all water, but it can be a solid or a liquid or a gas. Or it's like an egg. It's got the shell and the yolk and the white. People try to put analogies into there, but they ultimately are imperfect. Some theologians said, you try to fit an analogy into the Trinity and you're just picking a heresy.
Yeah.
Choose your heresy. In the end, all those analogies fall short. There's no other way to succinctly and theologically soundly put it other than it's one God in three persons, and that person, Jesus, has two natures. And this is fundamentally outside our experience, just like if we had a two-dimensional plane with people, and here's on this sheet of paper are these little two-dimensional people, and we transcend them. The concept of above, that's completely foreign. They've got no context for understanding what that is. It's intuitive to us because that's our nature. That's what we live in, but we can talk to them in analogies. We can talk indirectly, but in some levels, they're incapable of comprehending what we are. In the same way, Jesus, in all of these ways, is transcendent to us. And so we can describe it, especially in negatives, like, God is omnipotent, like he is everywhere. He is infallible. He is not bound by time. We can describe him in all of these ways, but in the end, it's just beyond us to fully comprehend. And it's fun to think about the mechanics of how these things work, but in the end, I like to think maybe one day when eternity comes, when we're in the throne room, perhaps we can ask, hey, how did this actually work?
Yeah.
Yes.
But once we're there, we probably won't care. We'll be too
definitely.
distracted by the glory
Yeah.
before us to worry about all these details.
All right. Well, Marky Mark, it is now time for our news segment.
What are we doing?
We're just going to be looking at the meme of the day.
Are we meme reviewing?
Meme of the day. This
Oh,
is
dear.
meme review.
We're doing
Are
meme review.
are we doing reaction videos?
We're doing a
reaction to
the meme.
a still image.
Yes.
Christians react.
Christians
React.
All right, I got a couple.
Or
here.
also known as the famous board game, What Do You Mean?
Yeah. What? Oh. Well, you said what do you mean?
Yeah, What Do You Mean?
Well, I like the what do you mean channel.
Yeah,
What Do You Mean
YouTube channel. That's a
they
good one.
they actually did an episode where they reacted to
Oh, there you go.
atheist memes.
Hey.
And so it's kind of what we're gonna be doing today.
Yep.
Yes,
Shout
is
out
that
to them.
lighter?
Absolutely.
The first one, I mean,
Thank
it's
you.
kind of just a picture. Pull
All
it
right,
up.
let's pull it up. Let's pull it
Oh,
up.
look at this, man. We got our
Oh
own
my
monitor.
gosh.
Evidence greater
Yeah,
than
it's a
faith.
picture of
Did they put this on the windshield or like the bumper sticker?
definitely.
So this is a
bumper sticker.
picture for you folks at home. It is the Jesus fish, which Karens and 45-year-old moms put on the back of their car. It is now a new
no.
fish titled
He's
Evidence,
just
eating the Jesus
Savage.
fish, also known as faith.
alienating.
So
the
saying that
audience.
evidence founded by science overcomes the faith of Jesus Christ.
It is a
Ooh.
fish with legs trying to allude to the fact
Oh, it's a leg
that,
fish?
So we
yeah,
see-
we evolved from fishes, you
This
know.
is the fish leaving the ocean to one day become terrestrial animals.
Yeah.
Right.
How did they breed? When was there a day where they just started?
Well,
you know?
here's my sole argument. I got an argument with my biology teacher sophomore year because he was big on evolution, big on the evidence of science. And I said, if that is the case, why is it still not happening? Why has no human being ever that's lived and wrote in history ever recorded it?
Mhm.
And where are the people in the middle? Why is no fish trying it now? Why are no monkeys trying it now? Why are no alligators trying to become birds. Where is the gap now? And he said, well, it's over now. And I'm like,
Oh,
well,
we're done evolving.
we're done
Of course.
evolving.
Everyone's done evolving. Okay.
And the funny thing is they pull it from Charles Darwin, and Charles Darwin literally in his book said this is not, his was not so much large evolution as it was certain animals in certain places evolved to that place. And he went and studied birds on islands and said, well, the bird on this island developed this kind of beak. And the bird on this island developed this kind of beak. It wasn't saying that this bird came from another animal. It was saying that birds across the board will gravitate towards different mechanics so that they can exist in the place that they're at.
And that's like, I'd say that's a level like micro evolution.
Yeah, microevolution.
I do think that there is good evidence for that.
Adaptation.
Humans are taller than they were 100 years ago.
Their makeup and their face and their bodies change.
That's probably a lot for how health has advanced, or health care or medicine or anything like that. But there are definitely micro differences between. But is this suggesting that there's no evidence for
God
for
anymore.
Christianity or God? Well, says who? Who's saying there's no evidence for it?
Well, and there's a John Lennox says that science alludes to more evidence and more confirmation of God. So to try to do the backtrack, I know that it's in pop culture, but there's genuinely not a lot of people who are actually, I guess, well-rounded in this.
Yeah.
Not very conversant.
Who would look at this meme and agree with it, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it would take more faith to believe that science just comes from nothing rather than someone creating it, right? Like an order to things.
Right. And that's also saying like people who don't, people who maybe are naturalists and say, oh, this is just result of, couple huge explosions and tailoring off from that. I mean, that's gonna, as you said, Mark, that's gonna take faith as well. So I think we all have faith inherently. That's just how we are. And but I think if you're, I think it's gonna come on the people who are saying there's no evidence for it. Have you actually looked into it? Are you just quoting a slogan that you've heard from other people?
Yes.
Because I think for me, the most important evidence is, did Jesus die and rise again? And did he predict that he was going to do that? And I think we have good evidence for that. We have eyewitness evidence. We have
non-believing
writing. We have
evidence for
manuscripts that date back to couple years after Jesus' ascension.
Meanwhile, Alexander the Great, no one refutes the first written account of his life was 400-ish years later. As far as historical figures go, we have far more contemporary sources accounting Jesus than many other figures.
I can't wait.
But let's not move on from this one, because as the medical dude, I got some comments on that one, because that's something that I've had to grapple with.
Okay.
And on one hand, I got the Bible and I got faith, the general revelation of nature and the special revelation of Scripture. And I've got all of the evidence of science, and I don't see these as contradictory to each other. If somebody were listening and they'd say, well, I'm not a believer, but I'm listening, consider if the God of the universe made us, he is the author of science, and science would not be contradictory to him. It would only be in support of him. Now, when we say, is the earth 10,000 years old, as we try to infer from whatever, well, we got a whole lot of evidence that may not be the case, but why does anyone believe that? That's a speculation. Microevolution? Absolutely. Even within the humans, why do we see people with darker skin coming from the equator? That's because we have a more intense sunlight there, and the people more colored like me are going to die of skin cancer more readily. Meanwhile, the people with darker skin, if you've adapted the people who are more likely to survive at the equatorial regions are the ones who are able to tolerate that sunlight without their lives being threatened. Meanwhile, if you had that dark skin at baseline in the northern hemispheres or further from the equator, you're going to get a vitamin D deficiency. And that's why my Anglo-Saxon lineage, we got pretty pale skin as an adaptation. This is a species that over generations has adapted to their setting in a way that allows them to survive better. And so, yeah, that's an adaptation. That's microevolution. And you could even make the case for macroevolution. There's a good argument for that too, an excellent argument for that too. Does that contradict the Bible? If the God of the universe is real and is the author of science, there should be no contradiction. And if I believe there is, it's usually an assumption. If you believe a contradiction exists, check your premises. Maybe you're making an assumption in there that may be inaccurate, such as, are you telling me that some God in 7 days made all the universe when we have all this evidence of it being, 16 billion years or whatever? What is the book of Genesis? Is that a science textbook? It's a love letter. It's meant to say, who is God and therefore who are we? It wasn't meant to be read like a textbook. It wasn't written for that purpose. And if you try to take it from one shelf of the library and put it into scientific textbook shelf of the library, it doesn't belong there. It's not what it was written for. Don't try to gather from it things it was not written to do, any more than, God told us what we need to know in that context, in that, in scripture and elsewhere. If my kid asks, how does this truck work? Papa, you drive a truck. How does it work? Well, I put gas here, I put a key in there, I turn it, and here's pedals and here's a wheel. Is that it? That's basically it. If I start getting into, well, this is a twin turbo V6, which, as opposed to a naturally aspirated V8, and, there's this kind of suspension, and let me tell you about the hydrocarbon differences of diesel versus gasoline and all that stuff, my 4-year-old is not going to follow that. But does he need to know that? What he needs to know is, here's the gist of it. What God has told us is what we need to know for his purposes. All the other details, did he create the world that we see, starting with a history, a timeline of 16 billion years? He could have. If we try to read into scripture scientific precision, we're asking something that it wasn't written for, any more than any love letter is meant to explain elements of physics. And if you see a contradiction between scriptural evidence and the science, are you making an assumption, trying to draw a connection that they weren't intended to draw? I don't believe a contradiction actually exists. There is a lot of unknown, which in our society we're relatively uncomfortable with. We like to define and explain everything, but in the end, there's some things that we can't know. And further, the implications of that, as R.C. Sproul put it, if we are just grown-up amoeba, if we had a primordial soup, which somehow against the laws of thermodynamics became, it violated, if genetics violated entropy and what was simple became complex, a brick wall can become a pile of bricks, a crumble. A pile of bricks doesn't become a brick wall. Order gives way to disorder. That's entropy. How did primordial soup and a cosmic accident develop the complexity that we see now? That is an absolute violation of thermodynamics unless something beyond the natural universe was guiding it to do so. And however that creator chose to present it to us, it wasn't to explain every little detail about amino acid chains and so on. But if, as R.C. Sproul said, if we are grown-up amoebas, who cares if the black amoebas have to sit at the back of the bus? There is no basis for human dignity if you have a purely naturalistic argument. And that's the position of Nietzsche, where ultimately might makes right. And there's, it's kind of a hot topic to even reference this. It's a rule of the internet not to even make reference to it. But Adolf Hitler thought that Nietzsche was prophetic and that he was the fulfillment of that prophecy. You want to see how a purely naturalistic, purely nihilistic, nothing has meaning, worldview really comes down to, the most consistent person in that worldview was the one who said, I'm going to refine the human race through eugenics by eliminating what I don't think is worthwhile and fostering the elements of humanity that I think are worthwhile. I'm going to prune the tree of the human race, so to speak. If you have a naturalistic worldview, that's what Nietzsche proposed. That's what some horrific actors in history have lived out. And if you have a purely naturalistic view, consider the implications, and it may make you rather uncomfortable.
Son, that was amazing.
That's
And
the things that you're
cherry on
obligated
the-
to think about when you go through faith and healthcare.
Sheesh. And also to add, James Tour, a neurologist and like spine doctor, he proclaims that science defined in its most proper form is the evidence of God, is how he defines science. So,
Man, that was such a long unpacking that my
Yes.
cigar went out. Well, thank you for tolerating that, but it was
yes.
worth.
So this one
worth
will
doing.
fall flat on its face here. It is two men hugging, and one man is titled religion, one man is titled war.
Okay.
And the war guy says, "Where would I be without you?"
Mm,
Marky Mark, pull up the stats on how many wars were actually started because of religion, primarily of the Christian realm, because I guarantee you it's not a lot. Most of war was started, in Charles just alluded, by naturalists combating
makes
the
right.
idea of religion.
Trying to figure out who, like, someone was so proud of this that they signed it.
Yeah, they did.
Don Addis?
Yeah, I mean, Don, if you're
Don.
listening, brother, you really
So wars are only started by religious
religions.
people.
Yeah.
Well, if we want to be fair, let's be fair. What he's saying is the warmongerer relies heavily on religion
Yeah.
to pursue his means.
Right.
And sadly, man, we got a lot of evidence for that. A lot of wars, religion specifically. Now, you want to take Christianity. Don't look at how individuals claiming to be Christians
Right.
have
Yes.
conducted themselves, because the Crusades, that ain't Christ.
No.
Nothing Christ said or did
yeah,
would lead to the Crusades.
You're not going to find in the Bible. By the way, this year, I want you to invade these people. I want you to, start these wars.
Well, we have the whole Canaan thing, but that was a judgment. That was a specific case of God exercising judgment on people for the sake of the promised land. That
Exactly.
was a special case,
That was.
and no one is authorized to infer from that. Therefore,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
so many centuries later, I'm going to invade
Yeah.
some other place.
I
Yeah.
think too, this comes from the idea, and Joe Rogan says it: soft men make soft people. And so this idea that a lot of people who exist today haven't experienced war to the extent that most of our ancestors did. And so to make claims like this, though religion and war have been found coupling together,
Yeah.
I don't think the Church of Jesus Christ reflects
No.
this.
And all you have to do, it's a good thing that we have the Bible, because it's such a self-correcting thing for us to look at. It's like people will do things in the name of Christianity and to be fair, in the name of other religions too. But if that's completely different from what the Bible says or what all these manuscripts say, it's just not going to hold weight. I mean, there's no...
Well, and Jesus himself was petitioned by numerous people to engage in war, and he always pressed against it.
Yeah.
The Sons of Thunder,
Yeah.
they were wanting,
Simon the Zealot.
they were
Right.
wanting a king like David,
Yeah.
and Jesus was not that.
Yeah.
And also then Peter takes out his sword, and in very bad fashion tries to kill the guy, but then just ends up chopping his ear off.
Yeah.
And Jesus so politely puts his ear back on.
Right.
So to say that religion and war, specifically Christianity, as what it truly is, doesn't engage in war, from my
there's
understanding.
there's no
So
evidence for that.
from what I'm seeing here is, out of like all the known recorded wars, about 1,763 of them, only 6.87% had religious like primary cause, and that's not even separating all the different religions, right?
Mhm.
And if you look at like true Christianity, like Jesus calls us to be peacemakers,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mhm.
to take like the wars of the Old Testament, which was a completely different thing and a cleansing of
Right.
people. Like, it's really easy to speculate and say, oh, like, you know, people are killing for Jesus, and that's not the case at all. Like, we're not called to that. So
When the most powerful individual of all history,
Yeah.
God in the flesh,
Right.
came to his occupied nation
Mhm.
and said, "That's not why I'm here."
Mm-hmm.
Who else would be more interested, if he had any inclination, to do war on our geopolitical scale
Mhm.
than him? Who would be more interested and more capable of executing it in quick fashion? They said, "That's not what I'm about."
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who has conducted a war in all of history in Christ's name, geopolitically, that's not what he was about.
Yeah.
All right, here we go.
All right. Yeah. We'll do one more
more,
here,
here
and
we
then we'll
go.
wrap it up.
All right, so this one is a Jesus figure. Looks like some kind of statue, winking and pointing.
Right.
Buddy
As
Christ.
As he does. Yeah.
Yes.
That's the buddy Christ.
Yeah.
He says, Jesus says, and then he says nothing because he's a fictional character in a storybook. And I love this one the
Oh
most
no.
because if this is the case,
Yeah.
I mean, if this is actually true, whether it's a meme or not, if Jesus technically never said anything because he's a fictional character, that anybody pre-cell phones, anybody pre, I guess,
Internet
the
video
American,
medium.
there's just then you have to basically say everybody, George Washington,
Yeah.
Alexander the Great, if you go into every university and every liberal arts, they're quoting Greek Greek philosophers.
Well, yeah, and we get so much from ancient Roman historians, so we have to discredit everything they say because the Roman historians talked about Jesus quite a bit. I mean, we talked about Tacitus last week, so I guess we have to ignore everything else they're saying too because, you know, if they're making this up, then they're probably making everything else up too. But yeah, I mean, even a lot of the hardcore atheists acknowledge that Jesus was a real person. You know, whether or not you believe he's divine, I think that's a matter of the heart. But I think, yeah, I mean, we can definitely look and see there's evidence for Jesus. I'd go further saying that there's evidence for his divinity and the fact that he performed miracles and that he told everyone that he was going to die and be resurrected. And he was resurrected and there was no body. His body wasn't found. If he really did die and stay dead, they probably would have taken his body from the tomb and paraded it around the villages showing that, oh, no, he's really dead. So he
we took care of it.
was a liar.
Well, and, you talk about the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire became very mingled with the Pharisees and the high priest at the point because the high priest wanted political power,
Yeah.
and the Romans were invading, or I guess
They were occupying.
they were occupying
Yeah.
all of the Jewish regions at the time.
Right.
So him and the high priest mingled together, and this is written in Roman history
Mhm.
that the high priest wanted Jesus' body parade. That they even went and got another martyr, and they paraded it as if it was Jesus. But they held him up far out from the gates and said, "Oh, see, we've got the Jesus guy. He's hanging here."
Mhm.
But then as time goes on, you see that as the eyewitness accounts wrote in, the Roman Empire said, look, we cannot deny what is unfolded. The Jesus dude body is nowhere to be found. The high priest lied to cover his own butt because he told the Jewish people that he would handle the dealings of killing Jesus. And so he was scrambling to cover up his mistakes. And it became very messy in the Roman Empire, and all the historians collected all this data. And as you go back, you can read it, that he's not a fictional character. If anybody believes he's a fictional character, they just have not spent the time to read and understand. And if you seriously do, or if anyone seriously does come to the understanding that Jesus is a fictional character, then they have to wipe out all of human history. And they have to believe all humans outside of their own experience is a fictional character. So I just think it's a very infallible idea that he'd be fictional, because
I think too there's plenty of verses that talk about that eternity is written on our hearts, and that there is a common knowledge of God. Like in Psalms 53, it says the fool says in his heart there is no God. And that word for fool isn't like an unintelligent person. It's someone who, lives waywardly in the ways that they want to live in their own desires. You look in Romans and he talks about, although they claimed to be wise, they became fools. Therefore, God gave them over to their sinful desires in their hearts. They changed the truth about God for a lie. So this truth is written on our hearts, but we reject that because we want to live for ourselves ultimately.
Yeah.
And that's really what it comes down to. There's no moral basis for anything if there's no God involved.
Right. Agreed.
Yeah. And what you mentioned about eternity being written on our hearts, how great of an explanation is that for how many world religions there are? Every society in isolation, up until the Great Enlightenment, more recently, that made a pendulum swing in the opposite direction. People have been seeking the transcendent. It is written on our hearts. Otherwise, we wouldn't have so many people searching, speculating, hoping, and you don't have to evaluate all 6,000 whatever world religions one by one. You can categorically say, all right, the purely spiritual ones, that there is only a spiritual world and nothing else. We have logical tests to violate that or to counteract that. The purely physical, we have reasonable tests to say anything that falls in that category, it doesn't fit. The scientific pantheist, the naturalist, the atheist, it is in the context of having both a spiritual and a physical realm that we can account for the evidence that we see. And the great world religions of Islam, Judaism, Christianity, the Abrahamic religions, among others, fall within that category. Eternity is written on our hearts. People seek God, even though often left to speculation. They've come to many conclusions. Zooming out, though, each of these memes, they're amusing, they're kind of cute, they make me chuckle, even if they're attacking, what I've bet my entire life and eternity on. To which I say, man, I'm navigating life by my values and beliefs and presuppositions. They are my landmarks. Every time I encounter something new, I say, how do I feel about that? I'm looking at my landmarks. My 4-year-old, when he encounters something new, he looks to me. Is dad happy? Dad sad? Scared? Cool? All right. Because I'm his one landmark. He thinks, he wants to think what I think. And in time, I want him to learn how to think for when I'm gone. And he can't always look to me. If you who make this meme or share that inclination, your landmarks in life say, I believe there is no God and so many other things, that's your prerogative, man. If you want to live like that, that's groovy. Are you satisfied with that? If you don't like where you're getting in life, maybe you're not navigating by your landmarks, your values, beliefs, presuppositions faithfully. Or maybe you are just nailing it 100% and you're dissatisfied with where it's taken you in life. Maybe you need to rethink those landmarks. But I feel secure enough in what I believe that if someone else doesn't believe it, it doesn't threaten me. If somebody challenges it, it doesn't threaten me. I was talking to a patient last week, and he was saying how he grew up religious and, reading the Bible and doesn't believe any of that anymore. And I said, well, full disclosure, I do think Jesus is who he said he is, but we got so many other constructive things to work on. Why do we need to focus on that? Some people in this setting would start to argue or feel defensive or offended. Whatever, man. I don't ask for permission to believe what I believe. And I don't think you should navigate your life by my landmarks just because me. Man, do your thing. Let's talk about your cholesterol or whatever. And, whatever we've got that we do share, we do have common goals, even if we don't have this common. If we don't share this, there's plenty else we share if only we choose to find it. Probably a lot. Let's focus on those things, though, I want the best for you. I am betting my life on this. And for your consideration, if I'm placing the bet that Jesus or God, however interpreted, defined, exists, and I'm wrong, I haven't really lost anything except a few years of fun living for something that turns out to be fictional. If you're betting that God doesn't exist, but you're wrong, what have you lost? And that in itself is not a reason to believe any particular thing, but it's a reason to consider why you're making these memes.
Mhm.
Because you could be doing lots of other things.
Yeah.
Well, that is a wrap on our new segment. What do you mean? Marky Mark, thanks for joining us.
Man, this was a night of firsts, man. We got
Yeah.
our first AV media dude. We got our first meme segment. This is delightful.
And Charles is here, and it's been a great night.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
For the loungers out there, thanks for joining. Thanks for hanging. We'll be back. I'll be a dad next episode, so
Woo!
Man,
it's gonna be a good time.
we'll see how
You're gonna
your
be
energy
sleep
level
deprived.
is. Yeah.
You're going to learn just how little sleep you can function on,
Yes.
man.
I'm here for it. So,
Well,
all right.
We
It's a wrap.
also, just to add, we have an Instagram now
We do.
at the Jesus Lounge.
Yep.
So go ahead and follow it for updates behind the scenes and whatever else might come.
Yep.
yeah.
All right.
Yeah, Charles.
Cheers.
Man, so glad to have you on here.
Dude,
was a great
gents,
time.
thank you for having me. This is good
Yeah.
fun.
Yeah. Love to hear what you say. And
Thank you
Yeah.
for having me. Enjoyed hearing what you guys had to say.
It's a great time.
awesome. Well,
All right.
thank you all for watching, and we'll see you on the next episode of
The Jesus Lounge.